Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is the Stephen Hour, and we are back with another Batman 66 episode review. Today we'll be reviewing the first ever debut of one of the best villains to ever appear on this show, the debut episode of King Tut in the episode The Curse of Tut. So, first off, before we do anything, let's get into the plot. Our episode begins with everyone at Gotham City Park when suddenly an ancient Egyptian Sphinx suddenly turns up. The Sphinx begins to speak in a female's voice, saying that the great king will soon, on this day, will take over Gotham City, essentially an ultimatum. This gets word to the police, and instead of calling up Batman, they call up Bruce Wayne, thinking that it's a publicity stunt since there is a Egyptian museum thing. And the calling of Bruce is a good scene, I will admit, when Bruce has no idea what's going on, and Gordon essentially sees himself as a bit of a fool. But what I also got to admit is it does make sense for the police to call Bruce in this manner, as well. Instead of always calling up Batman, they actually use a bit of detective work, and thinking, oh, this could be a coincidence. Let's check this. But of course, when they realize it's not Bruce, that it's not Bruce Wayne pulling a publicity stunt, they essentially know who it is, but they haven't told the audience yet. And even Bruce and Dick are a bit curious as to who it is. So here we are left in the loop of, well, who is doing this? And of course, Alfred does this scene to essentially get their attention to go to the bat polls, and when Commissioner Gordon calls them on the red phone, and Harriet's upset because they were supposed to go to this museum and now they can't. She's a bit upset, and I just like her in this scene. It's again, there's no way an audience could hate Aunt Harriet. We get through the credits and we essentially find out that the villain for these episodes is a notorious criminal known as King Tut. We're given a bit of backstory, as he used to be a professor in Egyptology at Yale University named William H. McElroy. And essentially, during a ride, he got bumped on the head, and he now thinks he is the reincarnation of King Tut, the famous Egyptian pharaoh, and wants to reclaim Gotham because he thinks in his twisted mind that this used to be a place of ancient Egyptians. And so we now find, and his crimes usually revolve around Egypt. And this is a villain we feel Batman has to say to feel sympathy for, because he's not a villain. He was this normal man under circumstances. We also find out that they've encountered him before, but he didn't die, but he never was sent to prison. He presumably died in a warehouse fire. So here is a villain that, this is why. So I already like how we are built up with this character, and we've yet to see him. And of course, realizing that their next causal objective is to go to Gotham Central Park to investigate the Sphinx. And here we then cut to a scene where essentially we are at King Tut's lair, which is at some kind of closed down museum. And here we get to see King Tut in all his glory with his men. And I like how he's presented as almost sane a bit. And this is something that's different to King Tut in later appearances. Granted, in these two episodes he will be a bit crazy and a bit silly, but he is sane for a bit. But his goons do call him out to be kooky. Again, two villains in the entire series have their henchmen call him kooky, and none of them happen to be the Joker, the Mad Hatter, and King Tut. Okay. Eventually, and of course, it's revealing that why he has the Sphinx there is to lure Batman into a trap and permanently get rid of him once and for all, which the goons like. And of course, because they are Egyptian themed, they dress as Egyptian, and they treat King Tut like he's actually royalty. This is mostly due to his twisted mind, but King Tut knows, just in case if things don't go according to plan, he and his goons must get down there right now for a contingency plan. And during the scene when they're down at Gotham Park, Batman and Robin are investigating the Sphinx, which is the name of the statue, and avoid a death trap. And then this woman, dressed in Egyptian garb, does a signal to the truck that King Tut is in, along with some of his crew, and also was the one to use to deliver the Sphinx in the very beginning of the episode, saying that Batman and Robin have escaped the attempt. He gets mad and furious and calling his men to get their swords ready and prepare to attack. Batman and Robin notice the woman chase her, but she manages to make her escape, and then there's a fight scene breaking out with King Tut's men. Of course, Batman and Robin come victorious in the fight, and the goons make their escape. Robin wants to chase him, but Batman realizes that this is no doubt a trick. They want them to follow him, and he realizes that these guys will next be at the museum that Bruce Wayne will be hosting, and he should expect a surprise. We cut to Bruce Wayne at the museum with a bunch of tourists, Gotham citizens, and some reporters, taking them around the Egypt exhibit, where they then reveal a mummified body, and to everyone's shock, he is alive. And they're surprised how this has happened. And of course, as the ambulance comes to take the body away, they take off the mask, and of course it is Tut. And he tries to speak. Bruce tries to hear it, but Bruce gets knocked out. Bruce Wayne is then put on the thing King Tut was on. King Tut quickly gets out of his mummified robes, gets back into his clothing, and essentially orders his boys to take Bruce Wayne away in the ambulance truck while he's, makes his escape. As this happens, King Tut makes an ultimatum that he's captured Bruce Wayne. This makes his way to Gordon. Gordon tells Robin. Robin freaks out. But Alfred tries to assure him that, he will be fine. Little does he know. And we then cut to a scene where Bruce is tied up in the back of an ambulance, and the goons are saying, even though that King Tut is kooky, he is pretty smart. But Bruce managed to make his escape, but he's still tied up on this trolley, and he makes his way out of the ambulance truck that they're going through, and he's actually making his way further down a cliff. And that's where we end our cliffhanger on. So tune in next time to find out how he got out of that. The cast for this is pretty much the same. Gordon and Chief O'Hara are pretty much... I think this is really, by this point, we got to see how bumbling silly these two are. And Harriet, even the little scene she has, lights up. And we got to see Alfred, like, the resource he has in to help Batman in this, with the situation. And this will essentially be the same in the next part. And Batman and Robin are essentially the same. They essentially are. But here we see that they have a bit of sympathy for this villain, as they know that he's not a criminal. It's just the split personality that this poor fellow has to deal with, which makes this villain a very interesting character. And speaking of a villain, King Tut, portrayed by Victor Buono, is arguably, to many people, one of the best villains on the show. He is in my top 10. But I must be honest here, in his first outing, he's okay. He's not fantastic as we would expect of him in later. He is a bit kooky, he can be a bit silly, a bit funny, but he's slightly sane. And I guess it's because the actor, who is a phenomenal performer, has not yet fully gotten himself comfortable with the role. But he is still a screen stealer, and I like how this villain is different. He has this almost army that follows his command, and they point out his silliness. He's not the full man-child yet. That wouldn't really come until some point in season 2, where it becomes a bit more silly. But Victor Buono really steals this performance here. He's seen as more saner, more averse, but there are some subtle hints of being silly and a man-child there, which I gotta admit, I do like that performance. But when watching this the first time around, I honestly thought, but I still found his performance nonetheless great. But I will admit, I really felt there should be more with this character, and thank goodness for me and many people watching, this character would get more silly and more over the top as the series went on. The Curse of Tut is, for me, a really mixed bag first outing. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I don't mind the story of this villain coming to reclaim Gotham, and the villain has a fast, interesting, and really sympathetic backstory. And the villain himself is okay. And but he portrays himself to be sane as royalty. He thinks he's who he is, this guy, and he can be a bit silly, but he's not fully man-child or captivating as he would be in later episodes. Another thing I also would like to point out is, where does he get all this? How does a professor amass this army, these resources to follow him? But then again, we audience are meeting him for the first time. I'm guessing and Batman and Robin have met him before in the past. But despite that, and so for all we know, he could have amassed this fortune, and he could have this fire, he could have survived, but he was smart enough to lay low. So therefore, he comes back after waiting for so long. So I like to consider it that way, and it would make sense to a degree. I also can't help but this villain actually reminds me of a more modern Batman villain called Maxi Zeus, a gangster who believes himself to be the Greek god Zeus. And for a modern Batman fan, you can't help but make that perspective. I think Buono does this role. It does this role okay. For me, he hasn't fully comfortable with the role yet. Like I said, that probably won't come till season 2, but who knows? Let's check on how he goes in part 2. And there we have it, The Curse of Tut, a mixed bag episode to one of the show's greatest villains. And an interesting debut, I will admit. It's not great, it's not perfect, and there's some bits that make you hard to buy the character, and the performance is not quite there for what the modern audience would imagine the character to be once you're told more about him. But other than that, it's still a fun episode. It's not great by any stretch. It's not bad, nor it's just a fun episode. And let's just see how we get with part 2. And we still don't know how King Tut plans to take over Gotham, but Bruce Wayne might have a role in it. So we'll find out. So tune in for the next episode called The Pharaohs and a Rat. So tune in, the same Steven hour, the same Steven channel, same Steven time. So long for now.